Okay, let's start. So I'll let you guys go back to sleep or back to work or whatever you guys are doing.
Work, probably.
Hello, shadowy supercoders, Ryan Sears and Keefer Taylor from Kolibri Finance or Kolibri Dao. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me. It's only my second interview, so obviously please bear with me as well. I'm no pro on this. This is purely for my own sort of intellectual curiosity, because I find it incredibly difficult to sort of keep up with all the development that's going on the Tezos network, specifically on Tezos network, which is where I'm spending most of my time with. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to speak about your project, which was one of the first sort of DeFi projects that was created on Tezos. So. But before we sort of jump into that, I think it would be great for people who watch this to basically just get to know you a little bit beyond your sort of supercoder identity. I know Keefer, I know for a few years now. So maybe we start with Ryan, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Yeah.
So what's your background and what you do and what you like and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I actually come from the cybersecurity world more than anywhere else. I've been kind of doing that for most of my career, and then kind of got involved with product development and all that other stuff through kind of working at other companies and seeing how they were run and kind of seeing how the sausage was made, so to speak. And then, as I started doing kind of more development work, the more I enjoyed it. So I went from kind of a cybersecurity guy with developer tendencies to now what I identify as is kind of a developer with cybersecurity tendencies. And I'm not doing a lot of the hardcore security work that I was doing once upon a time. I do still own another separate company called Calidog Security that does a bunch of other random product work and kind of just builds cool stuff. That's kind of a blanket, skunk works for me. But yeah, and so getting involved in kind of this whole cryptocurrency space and DeFi and all this other thing, really kind of was one of those situations that I've always been fascinated with cryptocurrencies in general, like the ideas, and it's like being able to work on the early internet where we've almost got too big of ideas before the implementation is there. So it's kind of it's like hearing Carl Sagan talk about the internet, where you're like, man, we're limited by our own technology at this point. But in the future, in 20 years, it's going to be this amazing thing. Not that it's not already amazing in itself, right? And so that kind of dragged me in, and now it's kind of this thing that's taken over my life a little bit, just in the sense of just being very interested in it and thinking about this stuff all day, every day. And yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at.
Awesome. That's and so you have a formal sort of coding education? Did you study computer science, or is that something that you sort of learned afterwards? Or
yeah, I mean, so it's one of those that I got a broad exposure to computer science and kind of programming in general through doing like application security work. So I did a lot of security reviews and basically secure architecting and all that other kind of stuff. Helped other developers kind of be able to do things safely. And then I realized that there's like a very little delta between kind of very secure, safe engineering and good engineering. And so it's kind of one of those things that like through teaching others how to secure their code, I kind of learned all of the ways to build good code. And so, I started having needs for wanting to build certain things and just kind of went, well, I can build that. And, went and worked as a professional developer for a couple of years and then like, moved around a lot and kind of just started doing my own thing.
Cool.
So
cool.
No formal, like I didn't go to school for it. I went to school for like computer networking and system administration, which was kind of a more general purpose kind of degree. Sure. But my focus had always been cybersecurity, and this was just because the college I went to didn't really offer like a cybersecurity course back then. So it was kind of one of those that like.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan. Keefer, what's yours?
Yeah. Sure. So my background is in computer science. I spent more than a few years of my career knocking around like some rather large software engineering companies before kind of falling down the crypto rabbit hole. And I think you alluded to this earlier, Lucas, but one of my first forays into Tezos was running like a, multi-stop course through Europe with Lucas, where we taught people how to run Tezos baking nodes, which was really fun. And yeah, I slowly just became more and more involved in the Tezos world. So I started like writing some open source projects, and then I ended up working on a bunch of stuff with Luke Youngblood, who is an advisor to Kolibri. And then at some point it became obvious that Tezos probably needed some sort of algo stable coin to kind of push the ecosystem forward, and felt like I was in a good place to kind of work on that with Ryan and Luke. And so we spun up that project, and that's what Kolibri is today. So most of what I do day to day at this point is Kolibri. Outside of Kolibri, I run a validator firm called Tessellated Geometry, which validates on 7 different proof of stake networks, and helps secure them and produce blocks and keep them online.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that probably covers it.
Cool. And okay, so Kolibri, what is Kolibri for the uninitiated? I'm sure there's lots of stuff already around on the web that sort of explains it quite well, but perhaps just a small summary as well for people that may not be entirely familiar with it.
Kolibri isn't a algorithmic stable coin that is soft pegged to the US dollar. And so unpacking that, algorithmic means it is a synthetic asset that is governed by algorithms rather than humans. So there are no humans all of the like day-to-day functioning of this thing is determined by computer algorithms, right? And then soft peg means it aims to be worth about $1. So it is not always worth $1. It may be worth slightly more or slightly less, but over time, we would expect its value to revert back to $1. And this is useful because you get all of the benefits of cryptocurrency, where you get fast, uncensorable transactions, but you also get a stable means of exchange where like you and I might not pay each other for coffee this morning in XTZ because the price has been between $6 and $9 this week, and that's very volatile.
Yeah.
But it is fast, and there's no intermediaries to pay people with, or to stop us from paying each other, which is nice. Yeah, and then the other like nice thing here is it's obviously trustless. Or it is trustless because you're relying on computer programs and algorithms to carry out the like issuance of the coin rather than humans who might be, want to scam you or might be subject to outside pressures to do things that aren't great for the currency.
Okay.
How's that?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks. And why did you sort of choose Tezos as the blockchain that you wanted to build this on? There's obviously sort of similar projects already on Ethereum. I'd say MakerDAO is probably the one of the pioneers. So what made you choose Tezos? Was it purely a sort of a right, okay, there's a niche, I can get in there, or was there more something to do with the protocol's qualities in itself? Why don't you start with Ryan?
Yeah, we basically, I think we were already close to the ecosystem. So Keefer and Luke are obviously kind of already ingrained within kind of Tezos. So it seemed like a natural fit. There's also some very cool kind of tangible benefits that we get by using Tezos, just in terms of kind of things like baking, and this kind of whole proof of stake network. I'm a big fan of proof of stake just in general. I think that it is very much so obviously where the world is going. The fact that Tezos delivered kind of years ago, and that this thing works and it's functional, it's got smart contracts and all this other stuff. Cardano talks a big game, but they are still kind of struggling with the getting out the gate kind of phase here, when Tezos has kind of been a fully fledged smart contract platform for a while. And so it's kind of one of those things that what that also leads us to be able to do is kind of build this kind of algo stablecoin in the same kind of vein as kind of MakerDAO and DAI, but add interesting and unique features. So like the ability to, when you lock collateral, still get yield from delegating to bakers is, as far as we know, a unique thing to Tezos and to Kolibri itself. So that's kind of one of those things that to be able to still participate in kind of the underlying protocol stuff with your underlying collateral while it's locked in and actively doing things is truly a fascinating thing. So that's, we saw the possibilities for stuff like this. It's the same thing with some of the possibilities that opens up, where we could have things like a lower stability fee as long as we capture the baking rewards to offset the cost of kind of stabilizing the system. Like there's a bunch of different interesting ideas that are suddenly available to us by using something like Tezos versus something like Ethereum.
Cool, thanks. Anything you want to add, Keefer?
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's also a lot of like interesting stuff in the Tezos protocol with regards to governance that is, at least academically interesting to me. I think we haven't really seen it play out in a lot of ways yet. But it makes me think, or it makes me have confidence in like the long-term sort of like longevity of the project. So I think it'll be around for a while. I think we'll see contentious governance forks in other projects, like, at some point, whether that's this year or 5 years from now. And I think those will be very hard to resolve. Whereas I think like there's been some contentious governance stuff in Tezos, and the community has largely been able to resolve it via on-chain voting as intended, which is, cool, and a pretty useful thing for the protocol and network. So that's always been very attractive to me about Tezos.
Definitely revolutionary, absolutely. And how did you find the process of sort of creating Kolibri Finance? What was it? Sort of you get together and you create a company, and was it quite simple? I mean, did you what were the main challenges? Did you sort of technical? I guess you have the technical side. What about like regulatory, financial, getting the right team? How was that process? Just in case people who watch this might want to do something on similar on a different project, and just for them to know how that sort of startup process, building something on the blockchain works in real life.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I can speak a little bit to technical challenges, but as far as like team formation, like Ryan and I kind of found each other like pretty organically and just did a little work together, and then found out we worked really well together and kind of like just built things from there. I remember, so Luke, who is our advisor, introduced us, and I think like Luke was like, I know this guy Ryan, he could totally help you build a front end. And I was like, sure, sure, sure. And then 2 weeks went by and Ryan came back with like all these like really cool front end designs. It's like, okay, it's mostly done. What do you think? And then I think that, I think at that point we just kind of had a working relationship where we kept building things together. And, eventually we like pre-launch, of course, but like fairly far into development, we incorporated an LLC, or I think it's an S Corp, based in Delaware, which,
everybody does.
employs us and helps us do things. Yeah, and I think like, we went out and grabbed a team of lawyers who help us figure out what we can do regulatory wise. And then kind of other than that, like a lot of our day-to-day is just like really, engineering heavy work. I think we'd like to kind of grab some more people in like the graphic design and marketing realm. And I think like, we're talking to people there or like working with our community. And I think, the protocol has like ability to finance itself by like developer or a development fund. So hopefully we can pay those people, and, they're run by a volunteer basis and chosen by the community rather than like chosen by people by like, Ryan and I.
And how long did that process work from sort of like initial sort of conceptualizing, like you guys meeting, to actually like launching your baby?
Yeah, I think like I wrote the first probably line of code for Kolibri in like September of 2020. No, yeah, September of 2020. And I think Ryan came on board sometime in December, and then we launched in February, if I recall correctly. So like fairly fast once Ryan and I started working together.
Yeah, awesome.
When I first started writing Kolibri, Tezos still had like really low gas limits. And so I basically sat around on, I think, Delphi and like fought with gas limits for my smart contracts. And then Ito fixed that, but the size limit for smart contracts was really small. So I sat around on, EdoNet and fought that limit for a while, and then contributed a fix to the protocol that made the smart contract limits higher in Florence. So a lot of that early days stuff was playing like gas and size golf, which like ate a lot of time.
So those upgrades that sort of people think of as sort of maybe housekeeping upgrades that like don't involve, huge let's say, tender bake upgrades or whatnot, are actually quite important for people like you who build stuff, when gas fees are lowered or things for smart contracts get added, like the new views thing that's coming up ideally. Those things are actually important, I think, right? And a lot of people don't realize that.
Well, and it's interesting because it's, with like newer protocol upgrades, sometimes there will be features or things that we have to kind of anticipate or wait for or kind of retool or whatever. So like when we were launching this DAO on mainnet, this was right before Granada went live. So that was the block times cutting in half essentially. And so there was some of our contracts that depended on the block height to kind of do time things. And it was kind of one of those things that, we had to suddenly do some fiddly math where like our farms were emitting at kind of a half rate until Granada went live, and then they're now emitting at the rate that we kind of set out to have them emit at. But the idea of like emitting at the correct rate for 4 days or 5 days, and then having to do a bunch of that kind of crazy math to figure out what it had to be, and then do an upgrade, was just one of those that it was like, well, it'll just emit for half speed for a while. Like,
yeah, I mean that's something that's gonna happen. That's to all the projects building on Tezos, that you basically always have to like adapt the project to the new sort of environment, and that's continuous work.
Yeah, well, and it does mean that we need to be involved in kind of the protocol development level kind of stuff as well. At the very least, we need to be cognizant of what's going on. There's been a number of times where Nomadic Labs has come out. So I think what was it, Florence with liquidity baking or something like that. I think liquidity baking was going to break stuff, and it was kind of one of those that we had to then go like, okay, well, now we get to pour some effort into making sure that this doesn't pass because it'll. We got called out by name by Nomadic Labs as something that would just break, and we're like, okay, cool. Like, but if this is gonna break, then like don't. Yeah, or that's what it was, banking accounts. And so it was one of those things that like, but it was nice because with this entire thing being open source and this entire thing being kind of governance on governance, it is one of those things that we can always go change things. We can, right now there's a competing proposal for replacing liquidity baking with USD XT or US or TZBTC with USD
TZ,
whatever the hell. That's the one. And so it's one of those things that it's very interesting to kind of have these mechanisms that actually do work for competing proposals and competing kind of everything. And especially when you talk about kind of our DAO sitting on top of this other kind of DAO, it's this kind of like turtles all the way down, fractally, pretty awesome. If you want to change it, you can change it thing. It's the nicest thing in the world in open source development when people go, oh, why doesn't your thing do this? To say, put it in a pull request, man, and make it so. And the ability for us to do that within the protocol too, kind of leads to very interesting things where people kind of go, well, I think it should do this. And it's like, great, write a proposal and go get it passed. Yeah. This is just how this works now. And you have just as much control as we do, basically. So it's a very interesting thing to kind of see play out.
Yeah, that's a nice analogy, the whole sort of equivalent to open source. It's actually the open source blockchain, I guess. I've never heard that, but it's probably fair.
Yeah, transparent to its core. I mean, that's kind of the whole idea behind open source, is that you kind of, front ends are already all open source in a lot of ways. You already download the plain text code to execute them in your browser. The difference with blockchain and smart contracts is that the backend is now open, and you can kind of prove that the backend is deployed here and that it does work as intended.
Yep.
Very cool.
Did you do this this startup by yourself, or was there any sort of did you get help from the ecosystem beyond sort of like networking friends, like say Luke or something, or was this a purely sort of your own bootstrapping effort?
This is very much so bootstrapped. And so to be clear, we have also received, I think, one security review thus far. So the Tezos Foundation did donate our first kind of Kolibri security review, which was super great. But that's really the only kind of external anything that we've done. The rest of this has just been me and Keefer and Luke sitting down and hacking away.
Cool.
And it's kind of one of those things that like we've all built enough stuff and we've all kind of seen where we can kind of apply this, that obviously we're just kind of growing this thing. But again, with a focus now that we're launched, is trying to get other people involved and get it so that there's good incentives to work within the community and good incentives to pass proposals and good incentives to vote. And if we set up all of our incentives correctly, then this thing will run itself and be itself and be its own kind of sovereign computer program.
Awesome.
There's only a very few of those.
Yeah. So what are the tokens on Kolibri for now? I believe there are 2 tokens. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah. So KUSD would be our stable coin itself. So this is the algorithmic kind of balancing act, and then we also have KDAO, which we did an airdrop, and we now have farms and now a community fund to kind of figure out. The community can now figure out what to kind of disperse those to, or whatever. But those are basically voting control within the Kolibri Dao itself.
Okay. Are you planning? Are you planning to add new tokens, or are these the sort of only tokens for now, or would new assets be tokenized, or how would that is that something that you guys are looking at for the future? Yeah. Or
well, I guess technically we have more than just KUSD and KDAO. If we've also got like the liquidity pool gives you a specific unique token called QLKUSD. And so it's kind of like we might do more of those kind of what I would consider kind of implementation tokens versus we kind of use QLKUSD as a bookkeeping mechanism more than anything else. At least that's kind of how I think about them, because they're kind of redeemable and whatever. But yeah, so it's I don't know. I mean, Keefer, feel free to correct me here, but I don't know that we've got any like major plans on launching like a new KDAO 2 or whatever. Like, that's not really like unless we have a need for it, right? If there's some kind of need that crops up, this idea of kind of fractional NFTs is an interesting thing, just randomly, but it's also one of those that like it doesn't really fit within kind of what our development cycle is kind of focused on right now. But there's we're both kind of engineers that have ADD, so we get dragged down rabbit holes all the time. And it's one of those things that there's nothing stopping us from getting dragged down a rabbit hole. But that's also kind of the beauty of kind of this small arrangement that we have, where it is just kind of, this feels like the garage hackers kind of level stuff, where we're just 2 good engineers sitting here hacking away on things that we think need to exist, and it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. We don't have a lot of meetings. We don't, there's not a whole lot of minutia. It's just kind of wake up, hack, go to sleep, and that's the world that I enjoy.
That's the feeling I get when I interact with especially Keefer. It's basically he's either super busy or he's sleeping.
Yeah, exactly. So, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, it's fun. It's great to be able to be so productive and do something. All
I think
the time that you enjoy.
If I can add a brief ad, I think Ryan and I both submitted a Kolibri improvement proposal last night for a savings pool, which would issue like interest-bearing KUSD, or IB KUSD as we would call it. And that would give the protocol would pay a fixed interest rate to folks who are in the pool based on based on the loan interest that others paid back to it. And I think like there's a couple kind of derivatives in that space that like we're thinking of launching, like Ryan alluded to some of them. I think that, we'll probably build some more. And then if your question was trying to get at like whether or not we're going to do a multi-collateral or multi like stable currency coin, I think like we'd be interested in doing that. I think Kolibri probably supports doing that fairly easily, but we really lack good price oracles for those sorts of things. For like a multi-collateral thing, we'd need to know the prices of assets reliably, and there's no sort of like on-chain oracle for Tezos assets. And I think like, additionally, like if you look at some of like even like really deep liquidity pools like KipuSwap, like they're still not really that deep, where like I don't think it would make sense to like, I think the most liquid token is Plenty, and I just don't think Plenty would make sense as a collateral. Not because anything to do about plenty, just because there's not enough liquidity for it around yet.
Okay.
And then the other side is needing to figure out a price of your collateral in euros, which I don't think there's a great oracle for at the moment.
Yeah, euros would be interesting.
Yeah,
I was a big contender for that, but I'll make do with the USD peg for the foreseeable future. And so, what are the mechanisms and the levers to maintain the peg that you're using, and how has that worked? And what are the lessons that you've learned up until now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I can talk through some of this if you want.
go ahead. Sure.
I don't know. There's delays. It's kind of weird. We don't know who to do which one of us should answer.
I'm sure we'll figure it out.
But yeah, so the Kolibri system has kind of what I would consider like three main levers. And so the one that is kind of the one that everybody focuses on is the stability fee. Essentially, this is the interest that's accrued or that's charged kind of for synthesizing KUSD. So you lock up collateral and you synthesize KUSD and you pay some amount of interest based on your loan size and just kind of it's a flat rate. So it's right now I think it's 19.5%, which is high for sure. And it's one of those that we're trying to kind of keep an eye on focused on lowering it. We're now the peg is in a very healthy state, so we can start kind of bringing it down. But we had to really ratchet it up at the beginning of the protocol just to kind of get things in balance and kind of get them to the point where they were staying. Peg was staying on. The other one that we have is this idea of a debt ceiling. So this idea of kind of the maximum number of KUSD that can be minted and exist ever. So what that does is provide a good kind of limiter for if there's too much demand for KUSD and it suddenly is at the debt ceiling. But if demand was high while the price was still low, then we could actually just hold the debt ceiling for a bit. That's kind of a dangerous game to play because then for liquidations, we do need the ability for people to kind of easily mint KUSD or at least be able to acquire it so they can liquidate underwater ovens or under collateralized ovens and all that. And then the third thing that we have is kind of this collateralization rate or ratio rather. So right now it's kind of 200%. So that's a 2-to-1 backing. If you put in $2 worth of Tez, you can take out 1 KUSD. There's other protocols that kind of have that lower. So I think Compound is like 150% or something like that. And so we've kind of considered doing some of these things as well. A lot of these are kind of somewhat immutable. So like I would say that those are kind of in order our preferred mechanisms to adjust things. Lowering the collateralization ratio, if we were to lower that to 150%, we basically can never raise it again because what we would do by raising it is basically instantly plunge a bunch of ovens underwater, make them vulnerable to liquidation. Exactly. I think that it could probably be done with a lot of kind of forewarning and communication, but like it's just it feels like a very sticky game that I think that we will get to the point where we're ready and confident to lower things to 150% or lower even. But right now, keeping things at 200 gives us a lot of wiggle room to kind of experiment. So the proposal that's in our DAO right now is really interesting because it actually changes the way that liquidations work, where we actually cut into some of that buffer that we are given with that very conservative 200% collateralization ratio in order to kind of facilitate the liquidity pool being prioritized over kind of any other liquidators. Which kind of helps align incentives and makes it so that people participating in the liquidity pool have a very good reason to participate there because they'll start actually receiving liquidations versus right now where it's kind of this ad hoc, Mad Max style transaction game. So hopefully that long-winded answer makes sense.
Yeah, no, that it does. And I'm glad you talked about the proposal that's on. So before we talk about that, just what's the governance process like in general? How does it work with Kolibri?
Yeah, I'm really stoked about our governance process. So we wrote an open source DAO framework called Murmuration. And a murmuration is a flock of starlings that are kind of like coalescing in odd ways in the sky and like making cool shapes. Which is a lot of like how I think, governance should work. And so we deployed this as Kolibri Dao, even though any project in Tezos could go pick up and use this DAO. And I think the folks at Plenty are thinking about using it. I think there's a couple other projects that might be interested. Um, and the DAO works by issuing a fixed set of tokens. So in our case, that's called KDAO, and it's a governance token for Kolibri. One token is one vote. And then the DAO can just accept, the DAO works as like kind of like a privileged role in the system where it can execute economic parameter changes just with code. So you submit some code to the DAO, people vote on it. And if it's passed, then the DAO will time lock that code for 4 days. And then like the code can just be executed. And I think that's really, really cool because there was not a human in the loop anywhere. So like I wrote some code, it does exactly what it says it's going to do, and then people vote on it, and if so, the code is just executed. And so there's no room for error or for people to slow walk it or for like for there to be a development delay or something. Like the code that goes on chain will be the code that's executed. And Ryan has done a lot of like really, really awesome work around like writing us like simulators so that we can see what the code does before it executes. And then he's also built like these really cool like workflows at governance.kolibri.finance. So if you decide that you think you have sufficient support to lower the stability fee, you can actually just go there and like click a drop down menu, enter the new fee you want, and it will generate the code that you need. And you can just like submit it all on a web page, and then people can vote on it, which is also just like really cool. So like the proposal we have queued now is rather complex, and like we had to write, the code and simulate it and like make sure it's, works. Whereas I think the last governance proposal we had was literally just a few clicks in the UI to like generate some code to change the interest rate for all of these all the KUSD in the system, which is really cool to watch.
I saw a proposal. Absolutely, you're absolutely right, Keefer. I mean, that's amazing stuff that you've guys done. So really, really cool that sort of anyone really can sort of propose code and change in it. That's wow, click and play even for like normal people like me.
So there is a bit more to kind of to our governance process, just in the sense of like, this particular proposal that we had kind of obviously came from within Hover Labs. Like we had an idea for a thing we wanted to do, but then there's this kind of Kolibri improvement proposal program as well. So if you go to our forum at discuss.kolibri.finance, you can actually see there's a whole section in there for KIPs, which are the Kolibri improvement proposals. That kind of outline things like future governance proposals or changes or kind of ideas for whatever, right? One of them is for kind of putting together social media role where they can kind of be an advocate for Kolibri. Yeah. And so with that, there's also a section in the forum for things called signal requests or kind of a signal vote, where you can easily put just a simple poll in and say, hey, community, I've got an idea where, one of the ones that I just put in was we want to raise the liquidity pool reward rate, but I don't have concrete answers as to what we should put it to. It's one of those things that it's always adjustable, but to start with, we need it not at 1%. So I just opened up a kind of informal poll that said, hey, what do you guys think? I want to gauge some sentiment here. And so there's a lot of this kind of coordination off chain that kind of happens where we can kind of make sure that like people are generally going to vibe with any proposals kind of put in. There is kind of within the DAO this idea of locking in, I think it's like 3000 KDAO as escrow. And then the idea is if it passes or has at least 20% of the yay votes, you'll get your escrow back. If it doesn't, then it's kind of this anti-spam tactic or mechanism rather, where that amount of KDAO will get usurped and kind of put into the community fund and you'll not receive it back. So if you put it in something that's wildly unpopular, or just some obvious spammy nonsense, then it's one of those that's like, well, that's only going to work a couple times, I guess. So
yeah, I guess, yeah. You'll have to,
well, because the thing with the
make,
DAO is,
yeah.
yeah, it's also, we only pass one proposal at a time. This is to kind of help serialize things and make it so that there's no potentially conflicting kind of proposals. There's a lot of weird stuff that kind of happens when you start allowing kind of arbitrary numbers of proposals to happen, that we kind of went, well, it's probably easier for us to just have a pretty short kind of end-to-end date, where, I think right now it's a full week. So from the time that you submit a proposal to the earliest time that you can execute it is about a week. So it's 3.5 days for voting, and then 3.5 days for time lock. So that seems to be a very good cadence for us, in the sense that, like, we've got enough things that we want to build, but we also don't want to kind of bundle everything together, right? If you look at like the infrastructure bill in America here, it's kind of this massive pile of just 17 billion things, and it's kind of we want to avoid doing that. The idea behind our governance should be that we can move swiftly, but we can also kind of focus on one thing at a time. And so
definitely lots of pork barreling in the US bill, no doubt.
Yeah, right. That's great. It's so fun.
But I do remember now what I wanted to ask, and that was on the recent proposal, or on the current proposal that's online. I noticed that there's a huge amount of sort of abstentions, and my question was whether those were active abstentions of people actually clicking abstentions, or was it simply people? Is it simply a count of the KDAO holders who haven't voted yet? That sort of like decreases as the yays and nays sort of increase.
Nope. That's us. So that's the Hover Labs KDAO. Like I said at the beginning, any proposals that we ourselves put in, we're going to vote to abstain on, so that it is not us kind of swaying it one way or another. But Hover Labs does have obviously
so
significant token.
I was a bit scandalized by sort of people not doing it. So I'll probably have to sort of rethink that position. So that's interesting. In terms of quorum, though, is it? Yeah, Keefer. Sorry.
Okay. One other thing that I think like is really cool about the voting we've had, and I didn't look at statistics this morning since I woke up, but so there's a bunch of KDAO that is in circulation because it was airdropped to either us at Hover or people in our community, and then more is dripping out through these farms all the time. And so two important points that I just want to like raise here. One is that Hover has less than 50% of the KDAO at this point, so there's large amounts of abstentions, but because there's a supermajority in the protocol, we were never able to pass things unilaterally, and we are definitely unable to pass things unilaterally now. So we abstain just kind of as like a, we don't want to lead people here, or like, stuff the ballot box really early on. And the other cool thing, I think, like I looked up the stats on last night, is based on the number in circulation. I think like over 70% of KDAO, like, participates in these votes. So we have like this really active governance community that like
that's great.
Does have opinions. And I'm also really, really stoked to see people voting like nay. I wish that I knew slightly more about why, but I think it's like really good and healthy to have people who are thinking for themselves and not just like blindly being like Keefer and Ryan wrote this, so like we'll stamp it. And I think that's like really healthy and like encouraging long term for the system, both in terms of like having smart people thinking about things, that also having like high participation rates.
Thanks, Keefer. Yes, definitely. I'm looking at the quorum status at the moment. It says quorum met, but it says yay 29%, nay 2%, and abstain 68%. And then it says proposals require a 67% supermajority to pass. What does that? The supermajority means that you have to have at least a 67% yay vote, or is that sort of the aggregate of all of them?
67% of
the. I know. Keefer, go ahead.
So you need a supermajority, which is only the yay and nay votes. So if you wanted to calculate the supermajority here, it would be yay votes over divided by the yay votes plus the nay votes. The abstentions only count towards quorum, not the supermajority.
Okay, good. So this will
So-
actually pass.
Yes, as this
Yeah.
stands
Oh, yeah.
today, this vote will pass, assuming,
good.
I think there's
Oh,
like
good.
maybe an hour left, assuming nothing terrible happens in the next hour, this vote will pass.
An hour
Yeah.
and 24
No
minutes.
impediments.
Oh, that's great. I thought lots of people were abstaining, and that's why yay didn't reach 67%. And so this, what I think, is actually a very good proposal, because it sort of automates a little bit the sort of yield generation for KUSD holders. I think it's great.
I also
Absolutely.
think this proposal is really cool because it actually changes the behavior of the protocol. Like we're actually like upgrading a smart contract, which is the first time that I know that's been done on Tezos, and is like, if we pull it off, which we're pretty sure we can,
I mean,
we'll be like,
point,
I think,
great.
yeah, I think pretty like useful for other projects to see it can be done. And hopefully we'll see more stuff like that, because I think obviously on Ethereum, there's a lot of upgrading that happens all the time. And like that really helps people do fast development work. And that hasn't really been something we've seen on Tezos so far. I know Ryan's like upgrades are bad.
Well,
fast
oh
is
no,
bad.
no. I don't think upgrades are bad. I'm just saying, like the backdrop right now is right after that $160 million compound oopsie. So that's kind of one of those that like there is a lot of sentiment about whether upgrades are good, kind of rattling around. I'm still pretty firmly in the camp that like you need upgrades, but it's also a safety thing. You got to be able to do all this safety or safely, and you got to have things like simulators, and you just and it's just going to improve over time. It's one of these that we're working on kind of getting the tooling correct and all that other stuff, so that kind of the sandbox stuff works and is kind of more generally consumable. But it's really nice now to be able to kind of deploy these changes to a sandbox and really have like a nice easy validation. All the front ends are hooked up to it now, so it's kind of one of those that you can actually watch this kind of percolate through and then pull up the sandbox Kolibri instance and go, oh cool, it did change, cool. And this is also very much so due to the baking or the Baking Bad team. They built the BCD hub kind of automation stuff for their own Better Call Dev kind of infrastructure, and we repurposed a big chunk of it to basically build out this simulator sandbox thing. And it was already very well made, very well packaged, and so now the ability to kind of have our own Better Call Dev hooked up to our own sandbox is like pretty awesome as far as tooling goes. It's kind of one of those things that like there's a lot of Tezos ecosystem tooling that kind of leaves some to be desired. That's one of those situations though that as soon as that was working, it was like, this is great, oh my god. And Better Call Dev is one of the best kind of development tools that I've seen really built just kind of in general. They do a real bang up job with kind of just transactions and kind of pulling apart what happened and when.
Yeah, I use it on occasions, but I'm not definitely not proficient in it. But it does go to a level of detail that's not necessarily possible to go to with the other ones. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you jumping ahead. You sort of preempting my questions already, Ryan, which is great, because I was going to ask in general what sort of building on Tezos, is what you guys see missing most as a developer, sort of libraries, tooling, that kind of stuff. Have you seen that sort of evolve? I mean, how much experience do you have on the Ethereum side, where okay, actually there's so much stuff going on here, or is where is Tezos right now? How is it developing? Are you seeing a lot of stuff on that side? Perhaps Keefer, you've sort of been building on that for a while now. But how is that? Is that something that's still sort of lacking, or is that sort of maturing right now? Or
I think things are maturing nicely. I think, I'm really stoked about the H protocol. There are two things in there that are really useful for me. I think one is views, which folks know a lot about, but if you're not a smart contract developer, it's a way to read values from other smart contracts. And this is really useful if you're like building a system that needs to work with like multiple assets, because you'll need to know how much each asset you have. And so like right now, this requires like a round trip call to each smart contract. So like you'd need to know how much plenty you might have or how much TZ/BTC you might have if you wanted to like have a multi-collateral lending product, for instance. And so views, I think, are going to make, a lot of our lives easier for some of the things that we're building, but I think they'll also make, most Tezos developers' lives easier. And they're also like just a glaring omission compared to like Solidity and the EVM. And so I think getting those will actually like make everyone's lives better. The other thing I'm really stoked about, which is somewhat technical, is the contract caching in memory. So if you look at like a Kolibri call today, it actually like touches like 7 or 8 contract calls. And so every time it touches a contract, Tezos virtual machine reads the entire contract into memory and costs gas to do that. And H has this new feature that caches it in memory. So a lot of the contracts that we touch the same ones. And so like, we touch KUSD a lot where it like will get called a few times in the flow of our things, or like we touch KDAO a lot in governance. And so I expect H to like make our contract calls really a lot cheaper, which in turns means we have more gas to do other cool things with them. And there are a few scenarios where like I would like to do more things or create more derivatives, but I can't figure out how to make it fit in the current gas limit. And so I think like those cool housekeeping and like incremental releases and like I think stuff that primarily people don't like really know that much about because it's not really a headline is actually really important. And like the smart contract dev side is getting stronger and stronger as time goes on.
Awesome. Really cool. So the cache, does the cache get stored in the sort of initiating smart contract or in your computer?
It gets stored on the validator's machine. So when a validator produces a block, it will read a smart contract from disk and it will bill you some gas for doing so. So it has to like read the bytes, then it has to like load all the bytes into memory and do like type checking, which means it like figures out like what are valid types to send to different entry points. And then if that contract makes another call today on Granada, it just discards all of the work it did and throws it back and starts that again on the next contract. And then if the first contract gets called again, it loads it into memory, does all the type checking and consumes all that gas again. Whereas today on a validator's machine for that same transaction, it would actually just buffer this one here. And so if it ever came back, it'd be like, oh, cool, I already like know everything that happened here. And so I can like execute this again really, really cheaply. Which I think is, very nerdy and very much like will never show up in a UI, but is actually really useful for like these more complex systems.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, it's really, really cool stuff. And I think it's important to mention that as well. What about like sort of, what if sort of, things go, let's say, tits up on Kolibri for some reason? Is there some kind of safety chute that you have, some kind of, I don't know, secret code stashed somewhere where, let's say, the seven kings come together with their rings and to forge the one and only to sort of break the DAO and sort of remake it, or what's that process?
Don't they usually come together to summon Captain Planet, I think? No, I'm kidding. Yeah, so it's one of those things that right now, the DAO is unreviewed. That's what we're working on right now is getting the security review for the DAO. So in the meantime, what we've done is we've launched what we call the break glass contracts. So the same multi-sig that was running kind of governance before we had a DAO, we've now made the governor of these kind of smart contracts that if need be, we can revert individual components kind of back to this multi-sig where we can kind of go back to where we just were before the DAO existed. The idea is that we can seal ourselves out of that once we have the DAO fully reviewed. But right now, especially when it's kind of early on, it's very nice for us to have that kind of safety mechanism. This is kind of this idea of kind of progressive decentralization, where at the beginning it was us kind of just executing stuff within the protocol, and now it's this DAO executing things with us having kind of hands ready to grab it if something starts kind of, as you say, going tits up, and kind of there's some kind of vulnerability or some other weird thing. Our pledge was always that we're never going to utilize those powers in any way outside of a security vulnerability, basically. And so it's kind of like this compound thing. The reason that compounds, unfortunately, this is so bad right now is because they've already locked themselves out. And then there's kind of this secondary pool that somebody figured out that you can just call drip on, that like adds another $60 million worth of comp or something to the comptroller. That was a buggy thing. And so, we're sitting there kind of going, what can we learn from this? And it's kind of, so we also have things like pause guardians, where the entire system can be paused by a multi-sig as well. So if there is something like that, likely what we would do is just pause things. Our plan is to really kind of, once the DAO gets reviewed, take another pass at kind of these trust relationships and these trust mechanisms and kind of these roles within the Kolibri protocol, where it would be great if the pause guardians were community members or kind of a culmination of 5 people, or need to come together Captain Planet style, or 7 people, Lord of the Rings, whatever you want to call it. And kind of we can have good kind of actors within the ecosystem be some of those trusted folks. I think the RAP folks have done a very bang up job kind of finding good trusted people to kind of be able to do part of their multi-sig and set up at the bridge and all that. So the idea is, I think we can take that idea and kind of implement it ourselves. Likewise for things like a pause guardian. There's also a world where we don't get rid of the break glass, and instead what we do is we just decentralize the access to the multi-sig for the break glass. And so there's a bunch of possibilities that we have here. We like the idea of sealing the door behind us, just in the sense that like this thing needs to be, it's the toddler riding a bike, right? At some point we got to take our hands off and let toddler either crash or let it go. And if we did our job right, the toddler won't crash and they'll go, oh my god, this is so much fun. But knowing toddlers, it'll probably fall over on its face.
But then they do get up most of the time until they can do it.
Exactly.
I know from experience.
Yeah.
2 more things about the pause guardian. So I think there's a multi-sig that can pause the system in case like something goes really wrong. And like things that would fall into like this class would be like, an Oracle exploit where like we know that the price in the Oracle is just really wrong. And so the pause guardian disables anything that is destructive. So it will disable borrowing, it will disable withdrawing collateral, and it will disable liquidations. But during the time the system's paused, people can still deposit XTZ into their ovens. So like if their collateral value is dropping, they can recollateralize their loans safely. And likewise, they can always repay their KUSD. So if they're, again, if they want to take the other side of that, they can repay their loan to lower their collateralization ratio. And then the other important thing there is that system can be paused through a multi-sig, which lets us react really fast, but it can only be restarted through governance. So like part of restarting it, if, everyone would have to vote to restart it. But also I think if we did something evil where we just paused it for our own good, no one would vote to restart it unless that restart also included like a rotation of the multi-sig. So I think like the people who hold the multi-sig are like really, motivated to do the right thing and not do anything for personal gain, even though I don't think that there's a method, as far as I can work out, that we could gain from pausing the system.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, even that part of is like we could pause the system and then no one can do anything. And we're at the will of KDAO holders to actually restart the thing. So whatever the KDAO holders wanted is, assurances that things were fixed or like were done correctly would be probably part of that discussion about unpausing.
Cool.
Which, hopefully is safe and
who holds the secret keys? Who is in the multi-sig? You guys or Hover Labs? Is that public knowledge, or is that sort of for security reasons? I can't.
No, right now it's all Hover Labs. And so, like I said, the idea here is that we're going to take another pass at kind of who owns what, and kind of these multi-sigs are all upgradable anyway. So it's one of those that we can always rotate in new keys or rotate out other keys or whatever. So it's but we need to kind of like I said at the beginning, there's about 4,000 things in front of us right now that we kind of, they're all different rabbit holes that we want to climb down. Where, you know, things like internationalization efforts, like I'm going through and trying to translate all the Kolibri front ends to other languages so that other people can
Well,
participate. We're trying to, like,
if you
always
need help with German or Italian, you know, shoot me.
All right.
Shoot me. I did do the TZ stats Italian as well, so I think that worked
Very
out all
cool.
right. So yeah,
Yeah,
we have to
well,
help.
we're gonna get, I just got really lazy with it and I just integrated Google Translate. So we'll see how that works. Hopefully that'll be better than nothing. But you know, we might do a
DeepL
full
is very
fledged
good.
kind of,
You know DeepL?
oh, no, I don't.
DEPL.com. That's like yeah, another level to Google Translate, just for your information.
Yeah, I'll definitely check this out. Because yeah, it's one of those things that, like, this is one of many things that we have on our plates right now. Better docs are another thing, and like there's just this idea of kind of getting things like the Compose Guardian kind of decentralized is definitely on the list. It's just probably not that high up the list right now. We really, it's kind of one of those things that there's enough things that we're executing on that it becomes obvious what the next thing kind of is to work on or to kind of deploy. Kind of as we build, where we kind of go like, well, we need this to do that, so we do this first, and then we do that, and so, you know, that's kind of where we're at right now. Is we're just kind of reacting to a lot of the kind of where we are within this kind of governance proposal process. Like we can't really, we needed to have a very good kind of improvement proposal system off chain. So I had to drop everything and go build out a forum and all that other stuff. And like now that that's working, we have to kind of stoke the fire, so to speak, and kind of make sure that we're posting and active and all that other good stuff. Drive people towards it. You know, oh, you got an idea in Discord, great. Go to the forum, go put in a KIP, and we can discuss there. And kind of that sort of stuff. So a lot of this has also been kind of, like I said, kind of community management, growing, trying to grow participation, and then kind of making sure that you know, people are involved.
Cool.
And I think it's been really cool. Like the proposal we have now, like I think I actually wrote the KIP, but it was based on prior art of a KIP written by a community member. And like I wrote the code, but actually like a lot, like those ideas were not my ideas. They were ideas that circulated in our Discord, and like the community kind of like bounced around a bunch of things. And like I think I kind of was the person who like took the 8 ideas and distilled them down into a set of rules that could actually be coded instead of you know, I there's a lot of like, I think there's a lot of over complication or like a lot of debate on like some of the exact rules there should be. And so I think I kind of grabbed a bunch of ideas and like wrangled them into something that was succinct enough to understand and easy enough to code, and low risk enough that I felt comfortable enough deploying it. But like, you know, even though Hover and I am the one who is submitting this, it's like actually very much community owned. And like we had a lot of debate on the forums about it. And like we've had even more debate around, you know, this on Discord before the forum existed. I think like basically this idea has been around since we launched the liquidity pool in maybe like May or June. So it's like, you know, it's one of the oldest running questions we have on our Discord is like, when are we going to do this and how? And so I'm very happy that we have like a really engaged and active community.
Yeah. What programming? Sorry, right. Go ahead, Ryan.
It's interesting to also kind of drive consensus through these mechanisms, right? It's kind of this idea of rough consensus. Like I think me and Keefer are both kind of big fans of that. It works really well in the software engineering world, where, you know, if you're, I think the IETF's example is like if you're trying to pick a data structure, right? You can pull an entire room of engineers and they'll come up with every data structure in the sun. But the idea is that you want to kind of try to drive some form of consensus within that group. It's much more important that there's no strong kind of dissent than it is that everybody strongly agrees with things. So it's kind of this interesting idea of rough consensus and running code that we kind of both embrace. So I think that really is shown through that kind of thing, right? Where there's all these ideas. Keefer finally just said, like, look, like we got to build something. This fits the bill. It works. We've tested it, and then I think the community is going, yeah, this is fine. This is exactly what we want. It accomplishes what we need. And while there may be kind of some disagreements about exactly how it works, you know, all of it's also adjustable. So, you know, it's a very interesting, neat kind of thing.
And Ryan actually has like a signal request out right now for like a follow-on adjustment that we might make. So I think like the proposal I put forth is a behavioral change, and then there will be follow-up proposals that like might come from Ryan, or like I think there are even community members who like may want to submit them that will change the actual economic parameters to tune these things in, which is neat as well.
Yeah, no doubt. What's the programming language that like, I can do when you do the plug down thing, where I can like sort of pull the code for proposals? What programming language is that?
So you're talking about the DAO proposal wizard thing? Yeah,
Yes.
so that's all essentially what I did was we have a lot of infrastructure and kind of tools and stuff that we built all in SmartPy. So this is kind of that Python based
Python.
smart contracting language. Yeah, and so what I ended up doing was basically generating a bunch of templates. So I would go kind of put in I would go write the Michelson or not the Michelson, the SmartPy to actually go invoke a Lambda to go do X, Y, or Z, and then compile it down to Michelson. And then what I did was I simply just used the Michelson as a template. And then the front end itself kind of stitches in the right values into the Michelson that's already been pre-compiled. And then this is how we support those kind of individual workflows. So like adjusting the stability fee, there's like 8 parameters or something like that that all just kind of need to be what they currently are. And then the one parameter that's changing, and then, so it's really not rocket surgery. It's just, but it is a bit of a process.
Just curiosity. Man, fantastic job on that, Ryan. Just sort of going back to the Oracle thing, whatever happened to Harbinger? Is that something that is being sort of maintained or could be useful in the future? Maybe Keefer, you want to say something about that? I remember you were kind of involved in that.
Sure. So Harbinger is a decentralized
Harbinger, not Harbinger.
Yeah, I actually might be saying it wrong. Harbinger?
I don't know. I'm not the English native speaker.
So Harbinger is a decentralized oracle that Luke Youngblood and I built on Tezos in early 2020. And the way Harbinger works is that there is a signer. And so a signer is like an exchange in this, as a concrete case, we have a signer in Coinbase. And so the signer produces a price feed, and then they sign it with their private key, which says like, hey, we, attest that these prices came from us. And then there's a poster. And so a poster might be someone like me and Ryan. It might be someone else in Kolibri, who pays to take this data from like Coinbase, who just serves it up like using a JSON API, and they make a smart contract call with it. And the smart contract will store that data, assuming that it is signed correctly. So the smart contract says, hey, did this data come from Coinbase? Is it newer data than I knew about? If so, it happily, just ingests the data. And if not, it will, fail it and not store anything. And this is really useful because it means Coinbase is like kind of acting as the root of trust, and Coinbase is pretty good at being secure, right? Their entire business model depends on them securing those keys. But Coinbase probably doesn't really care about, posting data to chains. Whereas like Kolibri users actually really do care about having that data on chain, because if it's not on chain, then the system would not have accurate prices and could fail in interesting ways. And so, Harbinger is still the oracle that powers Kolibri. Like all of Kolibri, we can change out these behaviors to other oracles if we ever wanted to. But we think Harbinger is probably the most secure oracle in the Tezos ecosystem right now.
It's signed.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's signed, and there's no it's signed, and it's very simple and easy to reason about what's happening. And I think the idea here is, as people become more invested in like having these prices, more and more people will pay for them to go on chain. So right now, Luke and I send updates on chain every 15 minutes with a generous grant from the Tezos Foundation. And so there are Harbinger prices that go on chain every 15 minutes. There's a community member in Kolibri who also posts them, I think, every 15 minutes. We have like 7-minute updates. And then we've also seen people just add updates themselves when they wanted things to happen. So I think like Ryan and I saw someone process a liquidation of a loan by sending price updates that, were not on chain yet at the same time as they sent a liquidation command. And so they bundled these things together. They knew they knew when the price got updated, things would become liquidatable. And so they just updated the price themselves.
So they tried to preempt somebody else doing it and the normal
Right.
cadence, and they just
rather than wait for the normal cadence, they actually paid a
Yeah.
few pennies to put this price on chain, and then were
Boom.
able to process liquidation because of it, which is
smart.
I think these sophisticated interactions are really cool and like actually really bullish for Tezos that people are like doing them. So I think it's like pretty cool to watch and like see people come up with novel strategies like that.
Yeah.
The other ad I'll give is just Ryan built a really cool website called www.harbinger.live. And so you can go there, you can see the prices in the contract currently. And then there's like 3 dots. And so if you click 3 dots, you can connect a wallet and you can actually post a Harbinger update from your browser. And so that will literally affect the price in Kolibri when you do that. Kolibri uses a weighted average of those prices, so it will not have a huge effect, but you can actually pay from your browser to post data on chain if you're so inclined.
Yep, I got it. I'm here.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, can't see.
It's censored. And there's no dub on that, by the way. It's just Harbinger.
Oh, sorry.
And yeah, it's but it's interesting because this is also a really nice kind of mechanism. So, obviously with automated posters, occasionally things burp or hiccup and kind of fail. It's very nice to have a separate kind of UI that people can just kind of go to. And we can, again, because empowering the community where we can say, look, anybody in the community, if you notice the price oracle's off and you want it to not be off, here's a website. Go click 3 buttons in it and it'll be fine. We run our own posters, but again, it's software. It's amazing that planes aren't falling out of the sky. So, having multiple kind of mechanisms to be able to kind of ingest the same data is very good. And there's also an alternative poster that I wrote in using PyTezos instead of the node based or the JavaScript based one that I think is running kind of elsewhere. So it's always a good thing. It's diversity.
Very cool. So I think we're getting towards the end. I think we've exhausted quite a lot of interesting topics. So very, 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 very happy. You've obviously launched when sort of the DeFi system on Tezos was, very thin. There are a few more projects now. They're live. There are a few more in the pipeline. I'm sure there are many more coming. What's your vision for Kolibri sort of going forward the next 4 or 5 years? Or do you not even think about that, given that you have 4,000 things in front of you?
I would say much more the second category, 4 to 5 years. Also consider the timeline, right? We launched between mainnet and our DAO launch was less than 6 months. So we, when you talk about extrapolating for 5 whole years, I really couldn't say.
In crypto, impossible. Yes. That's
exactly it. And there's new kind of innovations and new stuff happening, and especially with Tezos kind of protocol upgrades, things like Sapling, right? It's one of those that the Nomadic Labs just decided that they wanted to add primitives for zero knowledge proofs on chain, and that's great. But it's things like that that suddenly enable us to potentially do other things or kind of whatever. And so we have to kind of react accordingly, right? There may be new something with new kind of automated market makers and stuff like that. New algorithms coming out every day. You talk about Arthur Brightman sitting there playing with kind of the curve finance, flattened curve, stable to stable pool, CFMM thing. And so as that stuff kind of develops, happens, matures, it changes how our prioritization occurs as well. It's the same thing with kind of competition in the space and kind of all that other stuff. Uves has obviously come out kind of
Uves,
the time frame.
Uves. I was corrected. Did you see my other video?
I did. Or
at least the first 10 seconds of it.
Yeah. No, I saw enough to what I ended up doing is pulling down the subtitles and then looking for Kolibri, and I did see that you mentioned Kolibri, so thank you for that. But yeah, it's nice to have kind of other folks kind of also trying to do similar things. It's one of those things that this is a large ecosystem. There's plenty of room for kind of everybody. But there's also a lot of ideas that they've had that are very good, that, you know, I think we can kind of take and kind of make our own. And I think that they've also probably taken some inspiration from us. So it's kind of this nice kind of neat thing.
Pollination, cross-pollination.
Exactly. And then likewise, you know, you got things like Plenty, you've got things like Crunch or Crunchy Network, and you know, there's just a lot of really interesting things kicking off, to the point where we're happy to kind of talk to anybody about any kind of integrations or whatever. And what we care about is that Kolibri is a stable store of value and that it is healthy and continues in perpetuity. The ideal situation is that it's, you know, 100 years from now when we're all dead and Kolibri lives on.
Amen.
Basically.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah, I think just to add there, like Ryan and I have like a strong background, I think, of like sort of launching and iterating on things. And so like when you look at the Kolibri that we launched in February, that was kind of like the minimum viable product that we had. That, you know, we have a ton of ideas of things that we'd like to do better. And like there are 40,000 things that we could do better. And if we waited to do all 40,000 things, there still wouldn't be a, you know, launched product. And so I think like, you know, over time, we plan on like really smoothing out a lot of the rough edges in like Kolibri and like making things incrementally better through governance and upgrades rather than like having launched our perfect vision on day one. I think like, you know, the vision on day one was debated whether or not that was even good enough to launch pretty heavily. And so I'm proud of what we've made, but I think there's a lot left to be kind of like fleshed out and built and improved, especially as tools on, you know, Tezos and programming languages and tooling around the ecosystem gets better.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can speak for most people or everyone in the community when, you know, your contribution, I think, to the ecosystem is a boon, and, you know, hopefully you guys stick around in perpetuity, as Ryan says. But then again, you know, I mean, I think we sort of step back and sort of look at the whole crypto sphere in general, and sort of people integrating, I don't know, layer 2s, new solutions, you know, sort of AVAX getting launched on Aave. I mean, are you even considering things like a multi-chain universe, or are you sort of quite happy with the Tezos and quite comfortable that it'll be the last sort of blockchain? Not that these two sort of are mutually exclusive, but, you know, there's certainly things that people are considering on many different fronts. Or is that too contentious of a question?
No. I mean, look, I think we're happy to discuss anything. It's my kind of personal feeling that like right now we're on Tezos. Right now that's kind of the ecosystem that we've married. There's nothing stopping us from kind of exploring other things, but we want to make sure that before we do that in any real capacity, that kind of Kolibri is taken care of and kind of in a spot where we're happy to call it done, which, you know, as somebody who's a perfectionist with ADD, probably is not going to happen ever. So it's kind of one of those situations that, like, you know, because of course we've discussed it, you know, and there's a lot of other kind of chains, and we know other people kind of on other ecosystems and stuff who've, you know, have tried to recruit us a number of times. And you know, I think that what we have right now is working, and it's kind of where we want to be and what we want to be doing. At least that's kind of my sentiment on the matter. And if that changes, then we'll change. I mean, that's just kind of how it is. I mean, it's one of those situations that, like, if, you know, the Tezos Foundation shakes itself apart somehow in the next 6 months and Tezos is no longer really a thing, what's the point in building, right? I don't think that that's going to happen, to be clear, but it's one of those things that, you know, random crazier things have happened. So it's, you know, if we have to pick things up and move to a different chain, yeah, that's fine. But I say that with no secret plans to do so.
No. I get it. You adapt. You adapt. I get it.
Yeah. I think a lot of the L2s you mentioned are like they're experiencing adoption because, I mean, they're cool, right? Like AVAX is cool. But like primarily it's used for the C chain, which is just like a EVM like compatible chain. Like the like X and P chains have like some really neat features on them, which I don't think have like gotten adopted that much. And so like I think, as I look at like multi-chain stuff, I kind of just see a lot of like projects launching in different places. And then it's not clear to me how that will play out. It feels kind of like very land grabby. And that doesn't necessarily feel like a game I'm interested in playing. Also, obviously, Tezos doesn't use Solidity, Tezos doesn't use the EVM, so there's no like ability for us to go copy and paste ourselves onto a different L2 network or have anyone else do that. So I think it's like not really something that we've thought too much about.
Okay.
I think like if you're talking about bridging KUSD off of Tezos, like sure, like that sounds vaguely interesting, but I think there are a lot of stable coins out there and we're still a pretty small market cap compared to them.
Okay. So in general, sort of your own plans for the future, are you planning to sort of hang around Kolibri for a while? Will that be your calling for the next, or is that just one of the 10 projects that you're sort of planning on doing?
No, I think like day to day, like Kolibri is definitely the thing that I spend most of my time on. It's definitely the most interesting thing I work on. And I think like I really love working with Ryan and I love like our working relationship and just like getting to hack on things. And like I'm also like just really thankful for like the community we have where like, someone spun up a Twitter account and like I just hate writing tweets and doing self-promotion and like someone else does that now out of the goodness of their heart. Which is like awesome, right? Like so I think, my plan is to probably hang around DeFi for a while. I think like we have other ideas of like products or different like features that we'd like to launch. And like I think they'll all be adjacent to Kolibri and probably all in the DeFi realm. But I plan on sticking around for quite some time.
Cool.
Hopefully Ryan thinks the same. Otherwise that'd be bad.
Yeah. No, yeah. No, I mean,
I'm out
me and
next week.
Keefer have talked about this. Yeah, right. Yeah, and me and Keefer have talked about this, quite a bit. I think that with any kind of working relationship and any kind of endeavor, it's important to have kind of check-ins and kind of exit ramps, if you will, that you can take if you want. And there's kind of no love lost and whatever. And but we've it's the plan right now is to very much so just be focused on Kolibri and kind of see where it takes us. This is the most interesting thing that I can think of to work on right now. But
Cool. Great. I think that concludes our conversation quite nicely. And in fact, took much longer than I expected, but probably because it was
yeah, sorry about that.
It was no. It was very, very interesting. So thank you guys very much
again.
Bantering. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is. Thanks very much again for taking the time. Speak to me.
Of course.
Perhaps we can do this again in I don't know, half a year or so, sort of seeing what has happened. Looking back, I think it's always interesting to sort of see snapshots and then sort of discuss how it happened. Thanks guys for taking the time, and you're doing fantastic work. So we're looking forward to seeing Kolibri evolve in the future, and hope we can stay in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for inviting us. This has been great.
Yeah.
Really thanks for having us.
Really enjoyed it. All right, guys. Have fun. Go back to bed or have fun working or whatever you do now.
Coffee. I need coffee.
Yeah, coffee.
Yeah. All right.
Take care.
See you later, Lucas.